How's it going, guys? My name is Daniel Hanna. As you can see, I didn't use the directions on making the video. I'm not the most computer savvy person in the world, so hopefully this works. Like I said, my name is Daniel. I currently work for the Austin Police Department. I graduated the academy about 4 years ago, so I'm still pretty new, but I've been there long enough to kind of relate a lot of the material that we've learned in the first 8 weeks to my own experiences. Starting off with the complex decisions, there's a lot of factors that make decisions in police work complex. I discussed body cameras in my Week 7 news brief. One of the issues that I see the most when it comes to complex decision making is the decisions on how we deal with hotspot crime areas. Things like burglaries, auto thefts, robberies, we deal with on a regular basis, but there's lots of schools of thought on how we combat these issues. There's a lot of interpersonal impacts that influence how complex decisions are. Um, on one hand, you'll have the victims that want extra patrols in the area, have more of a police presence, make more subject stops, things of that matter. But then you also have the individuals that are against preventative patrols because they say it unfairly targets minorities. This is an issue, in the area that I work, it's mostly Hispanic, but I'll go into that a little bit later. You also have the higher chain of commands in our department that want us to use the manpower to combat these problems with directed patrols because they're the ones that ultimately get the complaints. But then you have your direct supervisors that want us to do our primary responsibilities, which is answering calls, maintaining police presence to deter crime, and probing suspicious circumstances. Emotions and external influences, such as the media, that also gets involved, and it makes the decisions on how we lower crime percentages even more complex. Risk is another factor that makes these decisions on how we deal with crime more complex. For the sake of saving time, I'll just talk about preventing burglaries. In one of the neighborhoods I work in, there's a huge problem with middle-aged teenagers breaking into cars. Our shift got pretty good at setting up and arresting these kids, but the problem wasn't getting any better in our neighborhood. We have a lieutenant, he's a smart guy. He came up with the plan of hiring several officers to work overtime, wearing plain clothes and riding around these neighborhoods, trying to spot out these kids that are breaking into cars. They would then relay the information to us in mark units, and then we would go in and detain the subjects and investigate further. The plan was pretty successful, and we were making even more burglary at vehicle arrest. But like I mentioned earlier, the neighborhood that I work in is over 80% Hispanic, so as a consequence, the majority of our stops we were making were on young Hispanic males. In my opinion, the stops that we're making were consistent with the ratio of the demographics in the area that I work in. But the media came out with something not too long ago that said that as a department we're unfairly searching minorities at a higher rate than whites. The article was pretty slanted. It didn't give a lot of information that it should have, and it was pretty biased. But the perception is reality, okay, and the reality is the citizens of Austin were told that we were unfairly targeting minorities. Um, I'm not sure if when the lieutenant came up with this plan he foresaw the risks, but it did. It was something that made the decision even more complex because now you have to deal with the perception from the not only the media but the community that they're reporting to. All right, so moving on to bounded rationality. I feel when bounded rationality is used in police work a little bit more than the rational decision making because um, there's so many psychological and sociological theories that explain why people commit crimes. There's strengths and weaknesses to each theory, so there's no one theory that best explains why we commit crimes. So there's no, or why people recidivate. So there's no, rational decision that can be made because nobody really knows. Everybody just has their own theories. These cognitive limitations limit us on this information, and it's why the police and city officials can't make a true rational decision when it comes to preventing and lowering crime rates. Because of all the unknown variables in police work, Simon's argument that rational decision is limited by cognitive limitations, the tractability of the decision problem, and the time available is a valid argument. I do feel that police officials use the rational decision-making model to base some of their decisions, but it's not going to be a true rational decision if you're looking at the true definition of rational decision making. An example that comes to mind was our police decision to have detectives work patrol for 1 week out of the quarter. There's a little bit more that went into it than just detectives working, and I'll explain it when I explain the rational decision-making model with this decision. But there's a very, it's a good thing to have a variety of options when it comes to what you want to do, but it also creates a high turnover in the backbone of police work, which is patrol. That's the reason why our chief had detectives working patrol, because our patrol was so short because of all the specialized units that we have. We can't seem to have enough cadets go through our academy. I don't know if it's a budget issue or if it's a recruiting issue or what, but the detective backfill decision was something that our chief used to solve the problem. And now I'm going to talk about how I feel that he used the rational decision-making model to come up with this solution. I haven't talked to him, but based on our talks with him about his when he came and briefed us on this is kind of how I felt that he followed those steps. The first step in the rational decision-making model is identifying the problem. Like I mentioned, the problem was that police officers on patrol are short-handed and our response times are increasing citywide. The next is gathering information. Information that needs to be gathered is what the officer to citizen ratio should be out on the streets, if there's a budget or recruiting issue that's preventing people from getting through the academy, and what kind of money is in the budget for filling the shortage, so on. Third step is analyzing the situation. In this step, you would consider different courses of action. Different options would be restructuring shift days and hours so that maybe officers have to work 50 hours a week so that there are more officers out on the street. Another option is hiring overtime to fill the shifts, having incentives for officers to stay on patrol for longer, changing the seniority rules, which would, our old seniority rules where you had to be on patrol for 2 years before you can leave to a specialized unit. That changed, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then maxing out the time that people are allowed to spend on a specialized unit is another one before they have to return back to patrol. Developing option step, our chief played around with different combinations of actions that are listed in the previous step, and ultimately he decided to have detectives work patrol for 1 week out of the quarter, and he also extended our minimum time for patrol from 2 years to 4 years before we can leave to a specialized unit. And then he capped out the time limit that you could spend on a specialized patrol from 7 to 10 years, depending on what the unit is. Our chief evaluated the alternatives, but the one that I mentioned was the least costly, and it upset some individuals in the specialized units, and it upset some detectives that now have to work night shift or evening shift for 1 week out of the quarter. But overall, I think it was best for the department morale. And then our chief came out and implemented the decision. He came and talked to all of us in our show-up meetings and explained in detail why he chose each decision and why he didn't choose others. Most officers are committed to making the decision work, but it's something that the higher brass needs to constantly reevaluate for the morale purposes of our department. Moving on to groupthink. Groupthink, I feel that I see the most in police work comes when we debrief an incident, and usually that happens the next day in our show-up meeting. We'll talk about a stressful event that happened the day before, a high-intensity call that happened the day before. Usually, all the people that are involved, start voicing their opinion and lets everyone know how they feel. And unfortunately, in police work, a lot of people feel that their decision is the only right decision, but there's more than one right decision, as we all know. This oftentimes leads to arguments between us, but overall it leads to constructive critical thinking, which is something that prevents groupthink. But when we fall into groupthink is when we have new guys or guys that are more reserved that don't say anything, so in order to minimize conflict or attempt to reach a consensus decision faster than if they spoke up. But the senior guys on the shift are encouraging the rookies and quieter guys to voice their opinions, because if the opinions that they had were wrong, then the rookie won't, or the new, the quieter guy won't make that decision if he's ever facing that situation. But if they're bringing up a valid argument that would have never been said if they weren't, I don't want to say forced to talk, but if they were encouraged to talk, then they're contributing to the critical thinking process. Moving on to the integrated perspective, I'm going to talk about a decision that one of my buddies made that resulted in him getting suspended for a couple days. He's a pretty hard worker, and he constantly finds trouble in a good way. He's always making good arrests, and he's always just trying to do good for the department. He was working on finding a guy that had a warrant for his arrest. It was a first-degree felony, a warrant for aggravated sexual assault of a child. He did a lot of homework and involvement on this guy, and they found out what car he was driving. And one day he sees his car driving, and he tries to pull it over, and the guy takes off. Now, if he knew for a fact that the guy with the warrant was driving, then he would be good to pursue. But since he didn't know that, he had to have something more than just a traffic violation to pursue. My friend, he only assumed that the guy was driving because he knew for a fact that that was his car. And it turns out that it wasn't the guy eventually pulled over, and it wasn't the suspect driving. So, in fact, the guy didn't even look like the guy with the warrant. So my friend couldn't even have said that he made a good faith decision in chasing the guy because he thought it was a suspect. So it resulted in a policy violation, and unfortunately for him, he had something similar about 2 months ago where he chased a car that he shouldn't have, and this time he got 15 days. Last time he barely got a slap on the wrist. So due to all the time that my buddy spent researching and finding the suspect, I feel he kind of fell into sunken costs because there's a one chance he sees the guy. He's done all this research, and he in his mind, he knew the guy was driving, so he felt that he had to chase him this time because it might be his only chance before another officer arrests him. He was also overconfident for assuming that the guy was driving and that he wouldn't get in trouble for chasing the guy. Like I mentioned earlier, when he first committed that policy violation, he just got a slap on the wrist. I feel that he decided to chase the car this time because he didn't feel that he was going to suffer any consequences, and this could be something on the group level. This time, the wrong person was listening. I don't want to say the wrong person, but someone higher than his sergeant was listening this time, and it ended up in an investigation being launched into a policy violation. So that's kind of an example of the recency bias. He recently he committed a policy violation and didn't even really get a slap on the wrist. And this time he probably felt that he'd get away with it the same way he got away with it last time, but someone important was listening this time, and an investigation was launched, and he ended up getting in trouble. So to sum that up, because of his direct chain of command being a little more lenient on his discipline the first time, he fell into conditions that led to poor effective team learning and performance in regards to the pursuit policy. Some system levels that contributed to this mistake was his cognitive human error, the radio traffic that was heard by the upper brass that wasn't heard last time, the wrong person driving the suspect's car, and whatever factor it was that made that person evade. One constraint that I feel that may affect the outcome is the many unnoticed variables that come in that have an effect on the outcome. In complex situations where there's an error, disaster, whatever, it would take a very long time, if it can even be done at all, for every possible variable to be analyzed. We read the Tent of Fire and the Mount Everest disaster, and they highlighted some of the key ones, but I'm sure there was many other variables that also contributed to it that either people didn't notice, they were just small and had just small contribution. In police work, there's many more examples of what we've learned applying to experiences in my personal and professional life. For the sake of time on this video, I just summed it up to the ones that we talked about in this video. So hopefully y'all are able to see this video. Like I said, I'm not very computer savvy, so thank you guys for watching.